This video is brought to you by the lovely guys over at Robotoys. For all your Hasbro, Takara, third-party and knockoff desires, Robotoys has you covered. For 10% off, use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout. Now on to today's diagnosis.
Read the disclaimer! On the other one, you bastard!
Greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown and welcome to part 2 of Seacons week! Now that we're done with the torso section, it's time for our first venture into the Limbots. Not all of you may realise, but even to this day, the Combiner Wars style of combining system is heavily criticised. Yes, the Scramble City integration was genius for the time, and to a certain extent still is, but many criticise the fact that the molds look very samey across all of them. And for Power of the Primes, I feel that's less of an issue, and there's more issues with how bad the figures are, but I do understand it in relation to Combiner Wars. A lot of the figures do end up looking the same due to their placement of the Combiner peg, and in terms of intrusive gimmicks, I do consider it quite intrusive, because you end up with the same figure constantly, and that is kinda true of these figures. But have they at least somewhat broken free from this curse and created some truly unique Combiner limbs? And are they worth the $60 price tag? Well, I think the more important question is Golf the perfect member to prove that they can? Golf puts the Piranha in Piranhacon, transforming into a freaky fish guy with the mouth of a bulldog. Right off the bat, I have to commend the designers for not making this look like a Prime Wars figure. Although not as many pieces have been changed as you'd think, it genuinely looks like a ground-up design in this mode, as opposed to a retool of Blot, which is what it actually is. Matter of fact, 2 of the members of this team are retools of Blot, and 1 of them is a retool of Rippersnapper. Considering Blot uses Rippersnapper's thighs, half of the Seacons end up using the same thighs. This doesn't change my opinion of any of these though, it's just something funny to note. Right off the bat, you can instantly tell that the paint is a vast improvement over Turtler. The face is painted in a pastel pink, yet it never comes across as weak and pathetic, thanks to the incredibly sharp details, and the, once again, very well done eyes. If anything, I think the eyes are done slightly better than Turtler, to be honest. The top also presents a lot of paint, the fin is done exceptionally well, and whilst the detail here is from the legs, it massively helps break up the profile, and makes it look more detailed than it actually is. Sadly, the robot chest is clearly visible from the underside, especially with the use of more pink paint, but thankfully in most cases the robot legs cover it up from the side view, and from the front the large head distracts to a certain extent. Speaking of the legs, they're surprisingly able to support most of Golf's weight, provided you don't put the arms out too far. This is thanks to the extra weight provided by the tail. It's simple, but it works. Now yes, the back section is a smidge messy, but in general the profiling of the beast mode is quite clean. There's a few things I could complain about in terms of the positioning of the gun, but to be honest there's limits to what you can retool, so we do have to cut them some slack. That said, one element where I won't cut them any slack is the section under the jaw. Getting the arms in there is a pain in the ass, and the way they fit in is just plain messy. Considering the forearm pieces are completely different from the original, they could have just placed anything there, but they didn't, and we're stuck with this, so okay I guess. The mouth section is also pretty underwhelming. There's no paint on the inside, which was an incredibly cool feature of Turtler, and after a certain angle it ends up looking unnatural. Maybe it's because they ran out of paint budget, given this thing is already $60, but even then these silver teeth are kind of messy. Considering the other paint is done quite well, it does seem like a step below. Still, taking all that into account, those flaws in this mode aren't quite big. It's a serviceable beast mode, even if honestly I'm not utterly wowed by it. Maybe it's the design, or maybe it's the weirder and wackier nature of the later figures, but honestly I'm just not getting much from this figure. Even when I bought it, it was just a case of, it's fine. Still, at least you get some decent weapon storage. First, he comes with 2 guns. They combine, which is much more for the leg storage and the Target Master mode, and they can be placed in 2 different orientations on the side of the head, using 5mm pegs and ports. I prefer the sideways configuration, partly because I've tried it more often and become more used to it, and partly because it just feels more natural. It gives me sort of a Doom Demon vibe, to be honest. You also get a knife, which kinda looks odd, but it'll make sense once it becomes part of the Trident in 5 days. At first you might think there's no connection port for it other than the seemingly redundant one on the mouth, which looks incredibly stupid. However, by virtue of being a retool of a Power of the Primes figure, you actually have a Prime Master port on the bottom of the combiner peg that you can use. It doesn't look amazing, but it does get the job done. Finally, you get a combiner hand, and let me tell you, I absolutely love this! For the first time ever, across any combiner produced by Hasbro or Takara, we have a hand that actually lives up to the standards set by the third-party add-on kits, especially Perfect Effect. As much as I love some of the other combiners, it's no secret that Perfect Effect add-ons are somewhat mandatory. Even with the additions that Hasbro added for Victorion and Computron, which were later added to Boldigus.
Your Highness, I'm sure it's not that noticeable. Hold!
Something just seemed off. This genuinely fixes those issues with a healthy amount of articulation to boot. But as far as storage goes, it clips onto the back of the tail. It looks ridiculous, but I imagine if they didn't give you the option, people would go ballistic. Whatever, I can take it or leave it. Articulation is pretty basic, which is par for the course of these beast modes, especially those who hide a third mode. Hell, this guy technically has 5 modes, so you have to cut him some slack. The jaw opens, but as I stated earlier, if you go too far, it looks awful. The arms rotate and the hips are on universal joints with a faux ratchet outwards. Finally, there's a faux ratchet on each foot, which greatly helps in the stability department. You also get a slight tail wag, but it doesn't seem natural. If anything, the lack of a locking mechanism on the tail is somewhat annoying. I don't know why this ended up like this, especially since later figures managed to fix it, but it was something so simple and they missed it. Still, overall, it's a pretty nice mode. It's got some nice heft to it, which further fills out the $60 price point, and when compared to the original Blot molds, yet again, there's just no contest. It's astonishing how different they managed to make him look. They essentially took the cube structure in the middle and then ran with it in a completely different direction. Kudos. Kudos. Compared to most combiner limbs, the transformation for Gulf here is a little simpler just because you don't have to perform the combiner extendo leg thingamajiggy, which means you don't have to fiddle with the tabs that are quite annoying in certain instances. First thing you want to do is remove the tail gun, and the use of the figure stands to plug it in is quite genius. It's not something I would have expected, but very good using the tooling they had. You're going to want to work on disengaging the legs, but to do that you need to pull the fin up, and then after that's done the legs should undo themselves. Now you may accidentally unhook the legs as well in the process, so you want to be careful with that. But then you just move the feet down, and then you've got a peg here, and over here there's a slot there, and they just tab together, which will also help secure the legs. Not all combiner legs are the sturdiest, so that's a nice touch. And if you haven't already, make sure to close that up in case you were using it for the weapon storage. And then undo the legs, they are pretty tight. Pull up the arms and then rotate this whole section back a little bit. Untab the robot arms and rotate them around like so. Then the arms rotate 180 degrees and down and however you want to pose them. The fists are back here and they're a bit difficult to get out, which is somewhat annoying. They really should have made these a bit looser, but then again, I don't know how they would have locked in otherwise. Now, this part isn't necessary, but I like to move the jaw down here just to give the backpack a bit more definition. But anyway, then you've got 1 hinge, 2 hinges, 3 hinges, 4 hinges, and it's all a bloody nightmare, but you kind of just accordion them all in together into the backpack. It's very annoying. You need to make sure they're all accordioned in like that so that you can actually fold the fin down. And then after aligning a few things on the backpack, finally you want to rotate the head around 180 degrees to complete the look. And when that's all done, the end result is actually quite nice. It's kind of in this weird middle ground between looking like a generic combiner limb and not looking like a combiner limb at all, which also makes it a bit generic, but ultimately not bad. In robot mode, Gulf certainly exists. Don't get me wrong, in terms of production quality, this figure is truly astounding, but as far as the design goes, he's far less of a weirdo than the other guys, which is kinda sad, especially considering the bonkers nature of his beast mode. Fortunately, he manages to get away from the combiner limb design trend through the use of expertly placed paint apps. As much as he can, he avoids looking samey, probably more so than any other limb member of this set, but as a result, he ends up looking just a little bit more generic than he should. Part of what makes designing a combiner limb so special is taking the established transformation and doing something crazy with it, and in the process of avoiding it entirely, there isn't really much to see here. The head sculpt is fairly middle of the road, sharing a striking resemblance to most of the Combiner Wars squared off deluxes. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't be an issue, but compared to the other members of this set, it just doesn't offer much. Also, the red is really underdone. Yes, red is one of the hardest colors to do, but yellow is equally difficult, and they managed to do that just right. The paint is a mixed bag. The legs are thankfully as good as they are in beast mode, breaking up the sea of blue that his pants are given. The arms are painted quite well, but they differ from the rest of the body in the sense that there's chipping aplenty. Especially for the connection tabs, cake is flaking off like a week-old flake bar. I'm not even sure why this is the case though, considering the rest of the body remains durable as f***. The torso doesn't seem to have any of these issues, but taking a look there, the visual department takes a slump. Too much pink. Come on guys, break it up a little bit. Nothing here is bad, and the sculpt work is as good as any other combiner limb, if not a little bit better thanks to how clean the back kibble is in comparison to some of the retail versions. But I don't know man, something about this guy just seems boring, and that's not even taking into account the far more interesting members. I don't know, he just gives the impression of generic combiner limb in this mode. And for the guys as wacky as the Seacons, that does seem like a shame. Although I do find it humorous that the 2 connection ports on the back, left over from Blot, are War for Cybertron Blast Effects compatible. There's no way this is intentional, but it's a neat unintended feature. Bringing his accessories back, the twin cannons are, much like the way this figure looks, underwhelming. They're serviceable, but honestly I prefer to just leave them in the back, in the same configuration as the Beast mode. It sadly won't function for the combined mode, but for now it does the trick. Following that, the knife is somewhat problematic. Given its importance in combined mode, you have to keep the wrist at an angle to have him hold it properly, and that's going to be a problem later down the track. Honestly, as frustrating as it is, I do prefer issues like these to having the combiner weapon suffer. Besides, if you so desire, you can undersling it, and honestly it doesn't look too bad. The hand attachment doesn't have a weapon mode, which I don't really care about anyway, so nothing lost there. So the final accessory is the tail gun, which doesn't tab in anywhere, so it just flops around easy as shit. The gun doesn't even look that good anyway, and it's easily the one accessory here that I'm actually disappointed in. Had it locked in, maybe I could have given it a pass, but as it stands, it's an exercise in frustration. Fortunately, his articulation works properly, as well it should, given it's a combiner limb with basically the same engineering as every other. Now pay close attention, because I'm only going to say this once. Considering that all the combiner limbs have the exact same articulation, I'm only going to go through this once, and then the rest of the videos will just link back to this video. So no more articulation on the videos from Tuesday to Saturday. Right? Okay, the head is on a ball joint, as are the shoulders, which also have an extra hinge upwards. The elbows are ball jointed, which allow for a nice bicep swivel, and although there's no wrist swivel, you do get a waist swivel. The hips are ball jointed, and the thighs swivel without issue. You also get a 90-degree knee, although there's no ankle tilt. This is the basic level of articulation that applies to pretty much any combiner limbs, so, as said earlier, I won't be repeating myself in the following videos. The only difference to most is that due to transformation, the wrists can move downwards. Aside from that, it's pretty stock standard. Size-wise, although his backpack gives him some extra bulk, he is precisely the same height as any deluxe combiner limb. Placing him next to Blot also shows there's virtually no difference in height from the original. Also, yeah, despite all I've said, I prefer Golf over the original Blot mold easily. Several improvements have been made, it's undeniable. That said, those are only 2 of the 5 modes these Seacon limbs have. Granted, the transformation isn't that crazy between each of these, but I still think it's commendable that they went through all the trouble. I won't be showing off the transformation for each of them though, but I will be showing off the transformation for the stock configuration in the combined mode review, which should be out on Sunday. But anyway, leg mode is surprisingly more solid than I first anticipated. With all the moving parts and extra tooling, I assumed that the combined modes would be incredibly flimsy. I'm very happy to report this is not the case. That said, you do have a large hollow section under the head here, and whilst you can somewhat draw attention away from it with the fin, it's still pretty awful. You do get the option of covering it up though, using the fin from the fish mode. It's not perfect by any means, but at least it looks passable from the front. Unfortunately, it means you can no longer place one of the guns on each side, as the use of one port blocks the other one. Still, you're able to combine the cannon on the side together. It's a nice touch, even if it's not perfect or intentional. Arm mode may seem pretty neat thanks to the amazing new hand attachment, but unfortunately now there's virtually no way to cover up the gap, as at this point if you try, you'll just gimp the bicep swivel. This means essentially you've got a random gun that doesn't go anywhere in combined mode, and whilst I'm fine with that, it's clear that the leg mode is far better. Even the forearm looks off, with the beast legs just sitting there. I know it's a hallmark of the original mold, but there's a reason they've got Kraken and Lobclaw as arms in the official combined configuration. Still, credit where credit is due, the shoulder mass is quite clean. It's just a shame you have to have the head facing upwards, otherwise it'll get caught on the panels inside. Not ideal, to say the least. And finally, Target Master mode exists. Honestly, I don't get the appeal of this. It's literally a leg mode with the cannons on the end. I get why they did it. The original toy had this feature, so to skip it would piss people off. Still, in this instance, I think it looks stupid. And getting this out of the way now, yes, the connection port is unfortunate. It's very solid, don't get me wrong, but you know that somehow, somewhere, someone is making an adapter for Shapeways or Thingiverse to get the hand attachments to actually hold the gun. Not sure how successful it'll turn out, but come on, we all know it's coming. So yeah, these 3 modes aren't anything special, but at the very least they are solid. That's all I can honestly ask for a combiner limb. Is the intended mode going to work? Well, the leg mode works almost flawlessly, so honestly that's all that matters in the combined mode. It may not do any favors for the robot mode, but hey, at least they tried in the most important section. In the end, he is a serviceable standalone figure, and he's far from the blandest of the Seacons. But even then, there's not really much here. But at the very least, starting off the lineup, he does prove that the $60 price tag is very much worth it. He may be a little bit middle of the road in the end, but if he starts off the lineup strong, then there's not really much to complain about. Although he only really does everything he does to a satisfactory level, I still highly recommend him. And hey, at the end of the day, the leg mode's great, so what else can you ask for? And with that all said and done, today's video was brought to you by Robotoys. They specialise in Hasbro, Takara, third-party and knockoff figures. If you haven't already, make sure to use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout for 10% off a singular purchase. Now, currently the Seacons are out of stock. However, Takara may reissue them later down the line, and even then, we're probably getting a God Neptune later, if the comics are anything to go by. But that's the far future, and we've got to go to the near future. Gulf was definitely worth it. But what happens when one of the figures isn't? Well, to answer that question, see you tomorrow.
Seacons